financial statements were reviewed. Councilman Robertson, city administrator, and the city clerk on the 29th of April. We went through probably in a 3 or 4 hour session. We went through every page of that financial statement as well as the 2 letters. That's why I don't intend to do that tonight. Any of you that would ever like to attend that session, we'd be more than happy to have you. The financial statements are preceded by a management's discussion and analysis, which was prepared by the city administrator. There's a letter at the very end of the financial statements, the last page, which is Minnesota legal compliance. This is where we do testing to determine compliance with state statute. There were 2 exceptions reported in that this year. We were under collateralized as far as our deposits at the end of the year, and my understanding is subsequent to year end, Kathy, that has been corrected. And we also had the lack of a performance bond on a construction contract. There was some discussion with the city attorney as to whether or not it was really required in that particular case. We felt that it was. He feels that there may be some extenuating circumstances in that contract, but we have included it in your as an exception in your legal compliance letter at the very back of the financials. A single audit is required when federal grant awards exceed $500,000, and that did occur again in 2009. So over the next month or 2, we will come back and perform what's called the single audit, the federal grant audit. And then we also issued 2 letters that probably were included, I hope, with your financial statements that you would have received. One is a internal control letter. Again, we only have the comment in there about the lack of segregation of duties because of limited personnel, which is very common in a city of this size. And then our auditor's responsibility letter, and there were no issues in that letter. And hopefully, I had a chance to take a look at those. So with that, let's get into the numbers. And what we do here is we're walk through revenues and expenditures and fund balances to give you a feel where the city, where things were in 2009, and then I'll look back through the years to see where we've been and where we're going. Hopefully, give you some feeling as to the financial health of the city. The first slide is the general property taxes. Of course, that's where we always start. The levy was taken up 6% this year, but you get kind of a hodgepodge here, and the reason for that is, if you look back, market value credit was put in place in 2002, where the state buys down the property taxes that are assigned to each parcel, and so that the property taxpayer is actually paying the blue part here, and the yellow is paid by the state in what's called market value credit. The state came along last year and said, you know, because of the flood, we're going to send you disaster credit. So regardless of what you levied, we're going to pay the disaster credit of this amount, market value credit of that amount, and the actual property owners are only going to pay that $400,000, even though you levied over $600,000. The state came back this year and said, you know, whoops, we sent you too much disaster aid credit. And they asked, you probably know this already, but they asked for $27,000 of it back. We recorded that as a reduction in market value credit. So really, this 631 should have been 604 last year, and this 606 should be $27,000 higher because the state paid us too much last year and asked for $27,000 back this year. So a little bit of a mess there, but it's a mistake at the state level. LGA and HACA, this is the state dollars that come in. HACA went away in 2002, and you can see the growth in LGA over the last 5 years. This growth obviously is not anticipated to continue. As anyone that reads the papers knows, the state has a lot of fiscal problems, and most likely that 594 is coming down. Next slide is the actual levy. The levy 550, 601, we took the levy up, as I mentioned before, 6% to 637. The one big change was a separate levy for the fire department, and you probably saw on the financial statements that that fire department's no longer in the general fund, but is reported separately in its own fund. Other revenues, TIF down to just $10,000 as the downtown development, redevelopment district was decertified, and now all we have is the town home district. Looking at overall at your revenues, the one thing we do is we just throw up on the screen your state money, which is the top part of this, versus the property taxes, which is the dark blue on the bottom, and just how do they equate. You can see back early part of the slide, we're at 45% city money versus state money when we just looked at these dollars, and through the years with the growth in property taxes, we actually got to more property taxes than the state dollars. these being the two largest funders of the cities. That's why we look at these two. With the last couple of years, with the increasing LGA, we actually saw a decline down to 44%. The disaster aid came in, and we dropped to 35%. And this year back up to 46%. But what this shows you is we still are quite dependent upon the dollars coming in from the state, as it's over 50% of this combined amount. Another way to look at it is just to look back through the years at the gross revenues with the LGA market value, and then this year, of course, we've added the disaster credit. We look at the yellow here compared to the blue being your property taxes. And yes, we did exceed the LGA back in 2003 and 2004 for the first time, but that has changed as LGA has continued to increase the last 3 years, and you can see the significant difference last year and the continued difference in 2009. Okay, from revenues we move on to expenditures. General government. In this case, the general government expenditures, which are the items you see here in the first bullet, have grown consistently and gradually, I guess, the last 4 years, other than 2008, where you see the engineering fees, the mapping, zoning updates, and the comprehensive plan resulted in kind of an unusually high amount. Other than that, it's been a fairly steady increase. Next slide, we'll look at public safety, starting with police. Police, there was not much of a change, $263,000 in the last couple of years after several years of steady growth in expenses. The next slide, we look at your police costs compared to some other southeastern Minnesota cities that we do audits of. And you can see the one thing I'd like to point out is Preston, that shows here at $271. They are reimbursed $84,000 by Lanesboro for the work they do for Lanesboro. So their cost is a little higher than it would be if they weren't doing that work in Lanesboro. But for the most part, it gives you a feel that you're in the ballpark. There are 3 contractors or contracted cities: Dodge Center, Spring Valley, and Stewartville. They contract with other law enforcement agencies to handle their police protection. And you can see their costs are pretty much in line with Chatfield and St. Charles, and Stewartville being quite a bit higher than Rushford. Next, we'll move on to fire. What we do on some of these slides is that are fairly capital intensive. We'll break out the capital outlay separately and try and look at the routine costs on the darker color at the bottom. And there really hasn't been much growth. There was growth through 2004, and really the day-to-day type costs in the fire department, but they've been fairly flat, actually declining to some degree over the last 4 or 5 years. And then, of course, the years where there are a significant amount of capital outlay, your public safety expenditures for fire will be quite a bit higher. The revenues related to fire are shown in the second bullet. Ambulance. Ambulance, again, we have the same thing. We have some pretty major capital outlay in gray. And in 2009, we had the bad debt write-off of receivables that have accumulated over the last couple of years of $139,000. That's the dark blue color you see there. Public Works. Back in 2007, there was an additional employee hired. It was split with the utility funds. That's what caused the increase there. And then increases of $7,000 and $6,000 in the last 2 years. I think the second bullet points out some increases in repairs and maintenance, insurance, and street light. We spent $100,000 in public works last year. Park and Rec. The decrease in Park and Rec is a result of the school taking over the community ed program. Dropped down to $84,000.